You
Well, thank you so much for inviting me today. And I'm going to be talking about my second book here, which is Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy in a busy life. And Shep, I really enjoyed what you had to say because a lot of what I write about also has to do with the brain and neuroscience. But let me just give you a quick background. I'm a gerontologist, which means that I study aging from the womb to the tomb. We look for the secrets of what makes a happy, healthier, longer life. And we look at the intersection of biology, psychology, and sociology. So, my book is creative nonfiction, and I combined a lot of science behind wellness, as well as storytelling, and then some solutions. And it's all for self help, self care, for people who feel that their life is out of balance. And there's a great word in the Native American Hopi language, Hopi tribe culture called Kawanakwatsi. And I know some of the filmmakers probably have heard of that because it's a documentary film that was done by Francis Ford Coppola. And I think it was Godfrey Reggio back in the 70s. But what that word means is life out of balance. And so my inspiration for writing the book is I've been doing a workshop based on this Me Time Monday program for employer groups for about 10 years. And when the pandemic hit, I really realized that people really felt like their life was out of balance. They had no control. We were isolated from each other. All of the things that we know really impact our both our physical and our mental health. So that became my inspiration for grabbing some of the findings from my workshop and doing a lot more research because also there's this whole wellness movement out there and we get all these marketing messages about do this cleanse, here's a new diet, here's a new exercise routine, do more meditation. And yet, many of us can't find those even few moments during the day. And so we feel like we're failing at our own self care and our own wellness practices. And what I wanted to do is break it down and make it very simple for people, give them some tips and solutions in order to how can they find just 5 minutes a day or even just 5 or 7 minutes a week. So what I do is I'm also very immersed in neuroscience, and I took it back to actually the ancient brain. And the ancient brain, in scientific definition, is when we have something called the savanna hypothesis. And that's 2 to 3 million years ago when we were living out on the African plains. We were outside in clean air, fresh air, blue skies. We had a mosaic of trees for shelter from the sun, but also from predators to save ourselves. We saw grasslands, which told our brain, okay, there's food and water sources here. And what we forget now in our lives, which are so tied to technology, is going back to the needs of that ancient brain to comfort us, to bring us a sense of calm and soothing. And so I really believe that tying the understanding of how the brain operates with nature is really kind of the key. So I break the book down into 7 areas of wellness, which are physical, emotional, social, intellectual, environmental, financial, and spiritual. And I tell stories in each of these areas and I give tips. And some of the things that I can tell you, for instance, I have a phrase called let's go from FOMO to flow, which is a psychology theory of finding happiness, and to JOMO, which is the joy of missing out. Because again, we have so many choices. We're in choice overload as a society. And the interesting thing is, while we think that more choices will make us happier, it's actually the opposite. More choices are making us less happy. So I talk about Marie Kondoing your life. And for those people who don't know who Marie Kondo is, she's a great guru on decluttering your home. Well, let's declutter our lives. Let's simplify and streamline the ways that we can find wellness. And it's through biophilic design, it's through being in nature. And I read over 450 peer-reviewed scientific studies that back up a lot of my thoughts and a lot of the claims I make in the book, watched a lot of documentaries, attended conferences, and I also interviewed over 20 experts across the country to weigh in on some of the hypotheses and things that I had. Now, the Monday part of this is using Monday science as your routine, because again, we have to get into healthy behavior. So I use behavioral science. There's a lot of science from Johns Hopkins University that Mondays are the day that as a culture, we look at that as a fresh start. It's a reset day. And so every Monday, if you can check in with yourself, if you can evaluate, did I touch some of these 7 areas in my life? Because again, you can be really fit, you can eat well, but if you have no wellness in your spiritual life, or you have no wellness in your intellectual life or your social life, your life will still be out of balance. So again, it's going back to those 7 elements and finding little things that you can do throughout the week. And again, not beating ourselves up if we don't have the time to find me time, but just resetting ourselves. And then it goes into some of the things around, dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin. I talk about harnessing the 4 hormones against the apocalypse, our own personal challenges in apocalypse. We need to learn these 4 hormones and how do we elicit things like oxytocin, which is bonding and trust, serotonin, which is our mood booster, endorphins, which is our pain relief, and dopamine, which is our reward. So I'll just kind of leave it at that and see if anybody has any questions, because I know I only had a few minutes here.
I love you.
Thank you.
I agree with everything you said. Monday's the key. I agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because, we saw this movement about bare minimum Mondays, like, I don't want to do anything on Monday. There's also
Mhm.
something called the Sunday scaries, where
Yeah.
people get kind of down on Sundays because they know they've got all this stuff they have to start doing on Monday. But I want to reframe that and have people look at Monday as the day you think about yourself, in the sense of, I'm going to plan my week around how I find some of these elements of wellness. And so you start to look forward to it because it's a day you reward yourself or reset.
And age, Chef was talking about he's 82. Big deal. Big deal. You must never let that number get in the way. I'm
Right.
83. I'm 83. I don't care.
Right. Right. Yeah. I went back and got my master's in gerontology after the age of 50. So,
I
age is
think I
just a
need to
number.
say what's
Right.
different about this book. This book isn't about nostrums. It isn't about rules for living. It's about a consciousness from moment to moment of staying in touch with the God that's within you. And the only reason I talk about neuroscience and computer science and evolution is to create a mental bridge to a spiritual destination. In other words, I've got to convince my brain that it's got to be put aside, it's got to play its proper role. But this idea is incredibly simple and it has no objective. If you read these self-help books, just take emotional intelligence. It says, well, you'll be more effective at work, you'll make more money, you'll do this, you'll do that. This book doesn't say that. It says that if you go to that centered place in you, which you can only do if you can overrule this silly machine, you're prepared for everything, whether it's confrontation or happiness or whatever life has to offer. So it's simple, simple, simple.
It is.
Congratulations on your book, Sherry. I think that I love how you've blended just the thoughtfulness with your credentials. There's a little bit of science backing that up. And I really appreciate the word you just used, reframing, because that's what I've been striving to do. You have it all in a book. I have it all in my head, like maybe that's a good idea. It just hasn't happened yet. But congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Sherry, I just wanted to say that I could add the fact that I'm not originally from America. When I first came to America, I found it so fast-paced compared to England. I felt like I was on a conveyor belt. Everybody was continually working. I don't know, it just was very fast. I've been here 31 years, but I still find it that way. And I'm one of those proponents as I'm in my 60s now, I'm looking to streamline, because I think you're right. The less we have, and I know for me personally, the less we have, the more relaxed I feel. And the fact that I work in a business, which is our business, but I was in education. The fact that I'm not on that schedule anymore, let's say, has really helped. So I know there's so much correlation. And by the way, my mother lives with us. I'm a caregiver. She has dementia. And I've learned from her simple simple is the best way to allow her to enjoy this season of her life to the best that we can. We don't get complicated about anything. We keep everything nice and simple.
Yes, and thank you for referencing family caregivers. That's where I've done my work for the past 20 years. And I do write my books mostly with caregivers in mind, knowing they have no time to focus on themselves. But to your point, one of the things I think is, and this goes back to the neuroscience, electricity was only invented over 125 years ago. And you think about everything that's fueled by electricity, our lights, our streaming, entertainment, our smartphones, our computers. And so we have all this technology that we have to embrace to be involved in modern life. But really, the formula is the more technology we have, the more we need to embrace nature. And I love the documentary film Kwanakwatsi because it shows freeways and grid lines in cities and buildings that are, just steel buildings. And then it pulls away into these beautiful nature scenes. And as you pull away from the earth, you don't see the steel and the technology and the lights. You see the beautiful blue of the ocean, some green, some white clouds. And I think that's just a metaphor for how we should be looking at more balance and more wellness in our lives.
I want to respond to this point about being simple. It's one thing to be a monk, where you really simplify your life. You live in a monastery, you eat a limited diet, you go through rituals. What I'm trying to say is you can live a simple life in the most complicated of environments. Let me give you an example. I practice law. I've started and run 3 entrepreneurial businesses. In the last one particularly, which is the period over which I've written this book has taken 20 years to get here. I led a company that today is worth over $1 billion. Now, I didn't dictate to people what they should do. In fact, when I started the company, I gave myself the title of Chief Asker of Dumb Questions. That literally was the title of my business card. And when I approached vendors, when I approached employees, I didn't approach them in a way of, it's got to be this way. When I negotiated with vendors, I didn't say, give it to us for this price or you're out of here. I said, look, we're all in this together. If we succeed, you will succeed. And on the issue of confrontation and evil, I've dealt with lots of people who behave pretty badly. I haven't yelled at a one of them. You marginalize people like that simply by pointing out what is good and right. So this idea of living in a complicated world, but having a very simple, basic approach that gives you a foundation to be an attractive, decent person that people want to please, works. And I know it works because I've done it.
Yeah. I think the other thing too that I found when I wrote my book is that we're all looking for new solutions, right? What's the newest, latest program or practice or whatever? And yet all of the research I found goes back to the ancient Greeks, the ancient Indians, whether it's Aristotle talking about a holistic, balanced life. And, even some of the psychologists back in the 1960s, like Claire Weeks, who really cracked the anxiety code. So what's interesting is we keep needing to look, I think, back in our history for the solutions and the seeds that are there, because they are, and just apply them to our modern lives.
Sherry,